Well, thank you very much for attending this virtual meeting. I would much rather be talking to you in person. And one of the things, having watched various Zoom talks, I really didn't like the little faces on the side, and I didn't particularly like the speaker's face on the side. So this is being done, while it would be much preferable if I could be standing as a lectern and giving a PowerPoint presentation, instead of which all you will see is the PowerPoint presentation with me as a voiceover. But it also means that the pictures are much bigger because they can occupy all of the screen. Anyway, my title is 5 Valleys, A New Dawn, or Just a New Name for the Merrywalks Centre. And I came to Stroud when the first Merrywalks Centre had been built, which was opened in 1973. I came to Stroud in 1991. And I was involved in lots of the arguments over the development of that by Streetlands, incorporating the cinema and obliterating the bus station. And then finally, Dransfield coming into the fray in about 2016. And I followed the planning applications closely. Now, because I don't like flashbacks in films, because I find it terribly confusing, I'm going to do this chronologically. But first, because there's not a picture of me, and obviously it would be preferable if you could see me gesticulating at a lectern when your eyes get bored of the screen. But why doesn't that move? No, that wasn't what was meant to happen. Never mind. That's not what was meant to happen either. It keeps going out.
I want to go into slideshow starting at the beginning, Tim.
Well, I am at the beginning, but it keeps going out of slideshow. Whatever I touch, whereas it wasn't when we did the rehearsal.
Can you try using the right arrow on the keyboard?
That's what the right arrow does. That's what the down arrow does. But it wasn't doing this before. When we did the rehearsal, it worked perfectly well.
It did?
Yep.
But you're not in slideshow.
Well,
he is, according to my screen.
I'm in slideshow, so it's a full... Right, well, I've got that. I know what they are, but down here, that should be presenter. That's presenter mode. But then you should move forward by, let's see if it does it on spacebar. No, it doesn't. Yeah, look, just click on it. No, but that takes me back into slide by slide. David, I think I'm going to have to relaunch the PowerPoint. I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
No, but it's meant to be full screen. Unless anyone can suggest anything, because it was working perfectly fine when we did the rehearsal, which is what's so annoying about it. But I can't find anything to click that.
Oh, you're right at the end of the rehearsal. You're right at the end. You need to start from the beginning.
Oh, that might explain it then. That does explain it, in fact. Sorry, because it's got the same slide at the beginning and the end. Right. Sorry about that, folks.
Go to slideshow and then start from the beginning.
Yes, I know about, I got that now.
Yeah.
Thanks, right. Nick. Okay. Anyway, as you're not going to see me at a lectern, I thought for those of you who don't know me, I would find what I find a reasonably recent and I thought reasonably flattering portrait, though it's nothing like as flattering as my profile on Tinder, nor my profile on Grindr. But this, in fact, looks as though I'm about to burst into song. It looks like a scene from The Sound of Music. But in fact, it's on a Civic Society tour of Bristol. And this is standing in front of Royal York Crescent in Clifton, which is enough to make anyone break into song. But I thought that at least gives you, those of you who don't know what I look like, that gives you a rough idea of what I looked like a few years ago and is a reasonable approximation. Now, as I said, I wanted to do this chronologically because I don't like flashbacks. The story of the Merrywalks development goes back to the 1960s, and the most notable event in Stroud in the 1960s was the Beatles playing the Subrooms on the 31st of March and the 1st of September 1962. It is often said incorrectly that this was the first gig they did outside Liverpool and Hamburg. It's not true. There's a book called The Beatles Bible, which reveals they played it of all places, Aldershot, before they came to Stroud. But it's odd that they came twice because this is a flyer for the Saturday, the 31st of March meeting, gig that they did. And it is said that on one of those two occasions, they stayed at the Imperial Hotel. This is a slightly older photograph, but the cars are older rather than newer. And in fact, the last manager of the Imperial Hotel was trying to find out which rooms they'd stayed in, perhaps with a view to actually naming them. Though in this case, the band did not have Ringo, but had Pete Best. It recently featured in the Daily Mail in this collage, because the Daily Mail thought it was particularly funny that a building that the Beatles had played in should be being sold for £1. And they completely misunderstood that this was actually part of a community asset transfer. Therefore, it did not reflect the value of the building itself. But on the other hand, the various bits and pieces that were dug up did contain this statement from Paul McCartney. Stroud was pretty bad. We'd never heard of it, but we went there, and I think about 3 people showed up. We were paid just 32 quid for the gig. Some of them were Teds and started throwing money at us, throwing pennies at us, but we just picked them up and thought, that'll do it. So clearly, to go down in history as the Beatles' worst ever gig is a claim to fame for any town, and Stroud, rather than Aldershot, has it. Now, that was in 1962, and about that time, the County Council was engaged in various plans for a ring road. Now, one of the terms that I came across recently for this is called engineered modernism. And engineered modernism, which has basically laid waste to almost every country in the Western world, consists basically of building roads, multi-story car parks, high-rise blocks, and basically re-engineering the city for what is imagined to be a modernist future. So you can see it at its most vivid examples in, say, the motorway constructions in Glasgow, the Inner Ring Road in Birmingham. But Stroud had, again, through the aegis of Gloucestershire County Council, its own effort. Now, this is an example of the proposals as they were in 1965. And the striking thing about this is that there's Merrywalks, which was built. There is Cornhill, which was built. But the contentious part was this stretch running from the top of the high street round, crossing the Slad Road, crossing over Lansdowne, demolishing several houses, and then crossing over on a flyover over Slad Road down to a roundabout, joining up with Merrywalks and the road to Gloucester. And this was contested strongly at the time, regarded as a disastrously vandalistic scheme. In fact, here's an example of protesters assembling in St. Lawrence Churchyard, and you can see that the board there says follow the ring road, and I think the idea was to walk the route of the right-of-way clearance to show exactly where the road was going to go and how damaging it was going to be. Now, as a result of this and a public inquiry, this section of the ring road was not built. In fact, the public inquiry inspector basically said that the proposals were so environmentally disastrous, particularly in terms of the flyover of Slad Road and the various demolitions, and so that was stopped. And in the end, later on, because you notice it's not in this, Dr. Newton's Way was built along here, borrowing the old canal tunnel. So that was the solution to not building this section. I think it can be argued this section was also unnecessary and has been highly damaging. Arguably, Merrywalks was probably necessary to be built if you have to build a road at all. But you will notice in this scheme, and the essence of the engineered modernism is that it features car parking, future development, a bus station, proposed shopping office development. The museum is the bit that's left here, 5. But you can see it's now surrounded by a new development. Over here, you can see the Merrywalks multi-story car park. Here you can see the bus station, rather bigger, I think, than the bus station that was actually built. This is listed as car parking, but in fact, it's the roof of the Merrywalks Centre. You can see actually the glazed arcade there. You can see, in fact, there's a huge emphasis on car parking in this, because again, that's what engineered modernism is about. This is what is now the Cornhill development, the farmers market, but then was surface parking. Yet more parking here, which was never intended to be a long-term scheme. And the beloved police station here, and yet more car parking here. So you can see really what the whole plot of engineered modernism is. But if we think that the Merrywalks development at the moment, I mean, this over here now is the future development. This is McDonald's and the Rowcroft Medical Centre. and which we'll come to later. But there's the Merrywalks car park. There's what was the bus station and became part 2 of Merrywalks with the cinema. And here's the original Merrywalks development. But you can see the way the ring road and these developments are part of a consistent and coherent plan. And the quid pro quo is we get a little bit of pedestrianisation along King Street and up just to Bedford Street on the High Street. So for this vast amount of destruction, that is meant to be the quid pro quo. There's too much traffic on those roads. The end result, as in so many towns, is if we go and have a look at this is what the High Street looked like in 1965. That's the best resolution I can have. But then if you're stealing photographs from Francis Frith collection, that's the best you can expect. But as you can see, this is not exactly an enormously troubled thoroughfare. There are parked cars. There doesn't seem to be a huge conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. So you have to ask yourself as to whether all this, the scale of devastation, was actually worth it for a traffic problem which seemed entirely manageable. This is another view looking down the high street with some rather fine vintage vehicles. You can see the delivery vehicles, which we still have today there. People are quite happily walking on the pavement and in the middle of the road. So again, there doesn't seem to be this overwhelming pressure for a huge ring road bypass solution. But then that was what planners at the time wanted to do. It was nothing about whether it was a good idea or it was necessary. It had become something that was what you did to an existing town. You provided a ring road around it. And in Stroud, we at least spared the full extent of it. This is a view down the high street, showing it actually as still a very busy and bustling place. This is with the old and rather awful surfacing, which were concrete blocks pretending to be cobbles. This is virtually the same view with the new surfacing, which for all its faults is a great improvement. Still a very bustling, attractive town, and the high street works very well. But it's not really fair to call it a pedestrian zone, which these signs proudly promote, because there are continuously parked vehicles there, continuous deliveries. And one of the great fallacies about building ring roads and saying you're pedestrianising the roads in the centre is you can almost never wholly pedestrianise roads unless you build a purpose-built scheme with rear surfacing. So if you walk up and down the high street, this is with the old concrete block pretending to be cobble surfacing, you always have the same experience. And this with the new surfacing is what you see in King Street. There are always vehicles parked, sometimes right up to and including HGVs at all times of the day and night. And there's simply no problem. There's no way of addressing that except actually by some sort of organised loading bays, which is what the public realm strategy prepared by Ben Hamilton Bailey proposed. That the proposals that always say we'll get rid of the cars, we'll create a pedestrian zone, never work, because there are always certain vehicles that will have to come there. So one does wonder as to whether the devastation that was caused was worth it. And even though the ring road or the contentious section wasn't built, that was stopped, but the scars of the right-of-way clearances for it remain to this day, and you can still go and see them on the ground. Now here, this is Church Street, with at the end, just to the left of that hedge, is the back end, the side entrance to St. Lawrence's Churchyard. These buildings are still here, and just behind us here on the right, the retreat. These almshouses, very charming, but why would anyone want to do something about them? No, those were cleared because the ring road wanted to go through there. So what's happened now? Well, you will probably know this site very well. That is what is left now after the ring road was stopped. There's no reason for it to be there, but now, yeah, guess what? Yes, it's just another area of surface parking. That is the Church Street car park. And if we go to the top of it, we see the police station, another part of the re-engineering of the town. And this wall here, built just below the police station, is both a retaining wall for police station, but is also the wall that would have been just on the other side of the ring road. The ring road would have passed just below the police station behind that wall. So effectively all of this, the demolition, the getting rid of the almshouses, was done even though that part of the road never got built. It was defeated at public inquiry. And in fact, if you go on Lansdowne, you can see the places where houses were demolished to make way for the road that never came through and have now been rebuilt, sadly not in anything like their previous form. But it does show you the devastation that can take place. And there are still even sections of that right of way that you can follow that have nothing on them at all. They're literally just cordoned off and serve no purpose, but it's still there because they were bought by the county council in advance of the ring road. So that shows you the sort of what the ring road did. And of the bit that was built, the Merrywalks section here, take a look at that first. That's the most germane to what happened with the Merrywalks Centre. Merrywalks, when I use Merrywalks, I'm referring to the road. When I use Merrywalks Centre, I'm referring to the shopping centre, which is one of the confusions, which I'm rather glad to say has now been altered by changing the name of it. The Merrywalks I've described as Stroud's shapeless, straggling western bypass that morphed into a strip mall. And what I mean by that is a strip mall is a development where all the frontages face onto the road, often with parking in front of them. It's a particularly ugly feature of American cities. And we have managed to build it in Stroud on a large scale. It's not just the multi-story car park, which you might say was more rational. Now, this is a not that early a picture, I think. This is probably, people who know more about cars might be able to date. I think this is maybe 70s or 80s, but you can see that McDonald's hasn't arrived, nor has Rowcroft, nor has anything in the foreground. But in many ways, those are particularly poor developments because they're thrown back behind car parks. The worst possible form of development is when you don't build to the building line, when you put the cars in front of it. And there's now a great sort of gash of car parking between the Merrywalks multi-story car park and the Maltings. And you can see in its original form the huge overbearing bulk of the Woolworths building, this great sort of mass of undifferentiated brickwork. And there's the car park. I think at this point it has lost its petrol station. But when it was opened, the height of modernity was to have a multi-story car park with a petrol station underneath. And I think even when I came to Stroud, I think there was a petrol station underneath, but certainly that's where it was. And it's sort of almost if you buy a toy multi-story car park for a child, you will often find it has a petrol station underneath it. So that was another sort of the aspects of engineered modernity. We ended up with 2 multi-story car parks in a town the size of Stroud and lots of surface car parking that really should have been redeveloped long ago. This is a more modern photograph. So McDonald's has arrived. The Rowcroft surgery with its very attractive diapered front. But again, there's basically a straggle of car parking and planting running in a great arc and still the bulk of the Woolworths building. At this point, the petrol station underneath the Merrywalks car park has been blocked in the most crude way, using orange bricks, deliberately sort of matching nothing. And that became Halfords. So you can't imagine a more ugly and depressing aspect to any town. It's extraordinary that this could have been achieved under the Town and Country Planning Acts, that this is the best that planning can do, which is meant to actually stop this sort of thing happening. And yet I think the Merrywalks side of Stroud is one of the ugliest and most apart from the Rowcroft building itself, but that doesn't mitigate from the whole complete mess of the planning of that development. It's a shameful indictment of planning, and you might almost say, well, why not go for non-plan if this is the best that planning can do? Now, I rather like this material that the Merrywalks multi-story car park is made of. Its technical term is vertically striated concrete with hand tooling. Hand tooling means you basically take a Kango hammer to it, and having got it ribbed, it looks like when it comes out of the mold, it looks like a butter churn, one of those sort of things that make those nice curls of butter. And then you basically hack it about to make it rough. It was a very attractive and fashionable brutalist style. What's particularly attractive about it is that it doesn't streak, it doesn't show the rain in the way that that fair-faced concrete does. And I'm rather fond of it. In many ways, I miss that part of it. Would have liked actually to have turned the whole thing into a green wall, so plants would have been flowing up and down it on all sides. Now, the bus station, which was again part of the engineered modernism of the county council, was once described, though this seems fanciful, as the most modern in the country, and has now, of course, been obliterated by the cinema and the extension of the retail. But I think these are in chronological order, but that's a rather nice photograph of when it opened. And I think this is when the buses were from the Bristol Omnibus Company who ran the route. And I think, in fact, for people who are obsessed about Bristol REs, I think there are 3 Bristol rear-engine buses there. You can see the back of Merrywalks, again, a deeply unlovely building. And here is the staircases, which I will remember, and the very exciting escalator, which didn't last very long. So by the time I came to Stroud, the escalator had long fallen into use. That is a later picture showing another facade of the bus station and the back of Merrywalks and the car park. I think this is later because this is now when the buses have become Stroud Valleys. It's interesting, that period, the late 60s and 70s, in a revulsion against brutalism, there tended to be a belief that everything should be made of brick, even if it was actually concrete, and brown brick was favoured. So basically, a lot of the back of Merrywalks is from that sort of brown brick, and supposedly this is more humane and vernacular. It just looks a mess. I mean, it's unbelievable something as poorly considered should have happened. This shows you a more distant view of the car park at about the same time. It's still Stroud Valleys and livery. You can still see there's this rather jolly sort of uptick logo for the Merrywalks Centre. And there is the glazed arcade running along the roof. And there is the back of the ponderous brick mass of the Woolworth building. People often say that the police station is the ugliest building in Stroud and it can be seen from miles around. I actually think the Woolworth, now Poundland building, and soon to be something else entirely, is the most oppressive because it's just such a solid brick mass. The police station is actually differentiated in its facades rather better. This is a later image, I think, because I think we're morphing into Stagecoach now. But again, you can see the bus station is getting a bit crowded and looks a bit of a shambles. And the final picture shows it when it is closed, ready for clearance as part of the building of the cinema complex. You can see the gates have come in. The Stagecoach and the other bus companies never wanted to be there because they had to pay rent to be there. And several times they actually walked away and said, no, we'd much rather be on the street, and which is, of course, where they've ended up. And in fact, once the hoardings go up, this is the cinema commencing construction on the left-hand side, you can see that street shelters have arrived. Still contentious this day. Some people think we should have a bus station. We were promised it. Some people think there should be a transport interchange at the station. But if you look at the way that would interfere with what Station Square is like at the moment, I have some doubts about that. I'm in favour of transport interchanges, but I really think it would be a struggle to put it there. And the bus stops for Main Street Lunning. I think the problem at the moment is we need better bus stops, not that we need a bus station, because as I use the buses very regularly, actually knowing which way they're going and knowing the numbers of the stops makes it very easy to find your way around. The fact that the bus stops are still at the main bus station in Stroud, not interactive. They don't give you information about the real-time arrival of buses when you can go into a suburban street in Bristol and find that information is on every bus stop. Going to Merrywalks 1, the first Merrywalks Centre, which was opened in 1973, this was pretty unlovely from the start, redeemed only by the airy sunlit barrel vaulted arcade. This is a fairly late photograph. And if in its latter days, but it was a particularly nice sunny day. It's a bravura piece of steelwork. Now, whether you would want to keep that with its sort of polycarbonate barrel vault, it's a rather expensive way of actually roofing that space, but it has produced a very light, airy place, and it's also a very wide space. At one end of it was extremely wide. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the original plans in the 1960s for the Merrywalks Centre look like that. And you can still clearly see it's the same shape of building, i.e. the mall is, and this is now a mall rather than an arcade, the mall is wide at this end and narrow at the other end, so exactly the same shape. It now has a flat roof and clear story glazing. So this would have been a much cheaper solution. So I don't know what stage we had the, I don't know what stage we actually gained the glass arcade. But it also shows, which is an interesting feature, that the reason that the mall was that wide was it was designed to have concessions in it. You can see there are both seats and there are places to, there's enough space to do things to put concessions up. And looking at the development of the mall, we are now standing at what was in its latter days Argos. Behind the glass, you can see that the supermarket at this end was Fine Fare, and at the other end, what was when I came to Stroud Gateway, and then became Summerfield, and is now Home Bargains. That was Key Markets, which morphed into Gateway. So interestingly, in a sort of modern shopping centre concept, we do have two food anchors, one at either end, Fine Fare at one end, and Key Markets at the other end. And the only interesting thing is the fact I don't know at what stage this flat-roofed, clear-story design gave way to a much more expensive barrel-vaulted roof. But I mean, it was the finest feature and the pleasantest feature, both particularly on a nice day, but even in poor weather, of what otherwise I found a lamentable and depressing building. Now, this is what Merrywalks looked like when I first came to Stroud, and it had what I think were these rather nice swan neck lanterns with circular globes. And you may recognize and have memories of the various people who are there. Now there's Gateway. So we're looking at the narrow end. There's the Gateway supermarket that then became Summerfield, that is now Home Bargains. And you may remember Fads, you may remember Lloyd's Chemist that's no longer there, a New Look, which is relocated elsewhere in it. But that's just almost like a period picture of it. And if you look at the floor pattern, this will become significant later. And this is a later picture again. This I think I took these in 2016, but this is when Streetlands had decided to replace these swan-necked lanterns with their globes, and I think it's a sort of mirror plate behind, with this, which seems to me dull and far inferior to what was there before. This is after the second phase of Merrywalks is built, because you can see looming through the glass, that is the bulk of the bowling alley on the roof. So this is at a later stage. And you can also see over there is the extension when the cinema was built and the retail was pushed through. That's another view of the narrow end. So this would be where, down here is where, is where Gateway is or was. Yes, it should be that end. But again, you may remember some of but this was just taken because it was a particularly nice sunny day, and it does show just how nice the effects of light were. Again, note the floor patterning, because that will be significant. And this is the back entrance, a particularly unlovely little stretch with an extraordinarily narrow stretch of shops on the right-hand side, which are just one room deep. So often they were empty, and often they were actually used for art exhibitions because they were virtually useless and have now been demolished. And it's also a particularly hideous example of pretend Cotswold stone and this sort of zinc leading roof material. But you can see at the end, that's the narrow end of the arcade with the glazed barrel vault. So this was basically late in the day, part of the Streetlands late occupation. And again, particularly shoddy surfacing. So everything about what made the Merrywalks Centre a very depressing place to be. Now, in the 1990s, when there was an enormous pressure from people, particularly at the Community Planning Conference, who said they wanted a cinema above all for Stroud. And basically the council took this on board and said, we want a cinema. And we were lucky enough, in fact, to get a 6-screen miniplex, as I think they're called. But unfortunately, they were so keen to deliver it and so obsessed about getting it done, they seem to have given up all sense that the design should actually have some quality about it. So the clumsiness and ugliness of the resulting scheme, which didn't even with the bus station having been a pretty ugly duckling, they managed to improve on it. So here it's the cinema being built. And the end result is this extraordinary sort of zinc-clad dustbin standing on stilts, running along Merrywalks, making what was already an ugly and chaotic street even uglier and more chaotic. And again, actually gives a certain dignity to the simple brutalist concrete of the Merrywalks multi-storey car park. There are so many, obviously these are the backs of the auditoriums behind the zinc, but there are so many different materials you could put to clad blank walls in. In Milton Keynes, they used mirror plate glass. You could have actually used white render and perhaps put neon signs on it to announce it was a cinema, like in the super cinemas of the 30s. This is looking underneath the footbridge that was run across. And alas, by the developer of the first phase of Merrywalks, and alas terminates before actually landing in Bath Lane, which it was intended to do. So it just turns back on a dog leg instead of taking you completely through. Another view, this is the point at which, as you can see on the right, the multi-storey car park now has Halfers underneath it rather than the petrol station. And the magnificent buildings at the end, the police station and the magistrates' court, both of which would have been taken away, demolished if that section of the ring road had gone through. So we have certain things to be thankful for. But as an example of just how ugly engineered modernism can be, it's very hard to find a better example than Merrywalks. It's neither a proper bypass where nothing should face onto the road, nor is it actually a street. And in fact, it's got this curious conflict even now where right in front of the bus station are 2 takeaway pizza restaurants. And so what happens, even though people are meant to park underneath the multi-storey car park, no, they park in the bus bays. So all the bus stops are interrupted. Now, the other thing on the actual shopping level, because Streetlands, who actually paid £1 million to subsidise the cinema part in order to get their hands on space to put Wilko's in, this is the bit that Streetlands developed from the arcade. And you can see the difference between the naturally lit glazed arcade beyond and this artificially lit space. And this is in front of Wilkinson's, or Wilco's as they now like to themselves. And there's also this extraordinarily large vacant area, which seems to serve absolutely no purpose. They've neither put concessions in there, they've neither extended the shop that it backs onto. And again, it's disconcerting as to why they actually designed a dog leg. Now, in the various submissions that the Civic Society made about the development of phase 2, there was a strong argument made that the cinemas should be addressed from the King Street arcade. You would basically come in, you would go through the centre in a straight line, not this dog leg, and then you would descend through lifts, preferably wall climber lifts, escalators, whatever, down to the cinema level or up to the cinema level if that was preferred. And the idea was that people would be funneled in and out of town through the Merrywalks Centre to get to the cinemas. Whereas what actually happened was the cinemas are then addressed from the ground level of Merrywalks, confusing its identity once again. It becomes yet again strip mall access to the cinema, even though some of the car parking is now on the roof. And it's disconnected from the other part of the leisure development, which is the bowling alley. But when Dransfield had their first public information day, I think it was in June 2018, I spoke to the architects there and explained the ideas that we'd actually put forward. And the architect I spoke to said that would have been a much better solution. But too late, that didn't happen. Alas, once again, Stroud District Council didn't seem to realise they had all the power because they owned the land and they were the planning authority. They had the power, like a development corporation has, to actually achieve a good design, and they didn't bother. Five Valleys. So we're now getting up to date. Dransfield's radical revamp and rebranding, involving the removal of the glazed barrel vaulted arcade. You might get the impression I have a bit of an obsession about that, but I think it's actually quite important. Now, in about February 2018, Dransfield applied for a grant and a loan from G First Lep, which was granted. I think it's £3 million loan, £1 million grant and £3 million loan. And this was the plan that they put forward to, which has been superseded, but it's roughly right in the sense that it shows that the idea is that the arcade that comes down from King Street, existing arcade, which at the moment stops there, and there's the big glazed cross arcade, instead goes straight through a much better arrangement than that proposed by Streetlands. And then there's, again, a rather odd sort of triangular area there, and then it goes out the back. But basically, the much simplified plan and the removal of the glazed arcades is apparent right from this. But the other striking thing about this plan, which was put forward to you first, is the aspirational nature of the tenants. In that there's H&M, there's Next, there's Waterstones, there's Hobbs, there's a whole host, Ponty's, a whole host of upmarket retailers, and above all, in pride of place where Poundland is M&S Simply Food. But the other striking thing about this is not only how aspirational are the retailers, but also that none of the existing tenants are there. So there's no sign of Home Bargains, there's no sign of Wilco's, there's no sign of Poundland, which at the very least seems slightly discourteous. But it does show some of the thinking and the ambitions. Now, when I've queried this with Dransfield, it's been talked about as just a speculative discussion document. Well, that's all very well, but it does show a certain ambition. And you might say the ambition was unrealistic because, for instance, none of this has been achieved, or very little. You might say that Jojo Bebe Mama and Couture are that, but really nothing like H&M, Waterstones, and above all, the holy grail of M&S Simply Food. These were the initial renders produced by Dransfield's architects, and they're very good. And on the King Street frontage, they have extended put a glazed arcade much bigger than the sort of paltry one that Streetlands had there over the entrance to the King Street arcade in order to highlight it. They've also taken out the ridiculous fenestration that Streetland had replied, where basically which was taking a little motif from the Green Dragon Public House, which is what this was. A little motif is then repeated all the way along here. And the aim is to bring the upper floors back into use as residential. So both of those are admirable objectives. This is what the arcade looked like coming down from King Street. And this is what Dransfield proposed it should look like. Now, as long as it has a glazed roof, I think this is actually rather charming, even if it is perhaps a bit twee and a bit retro. But you might prefer this. You might prefer the sort of bravura high-tech roof. I think some of the blank upper floors here and the louvered windows like this are rather dated and forbidding, and there seems no connection. So I think this is actually very charming. And you can see the way it then goes through there. That, to give you an idea, where Bath Lane came through, that now becomes shops. And so almost immediately on the left there is Santander, which I believe is staying in that position. Moving along the street, this is what is proposed to happen to what was Woolworths and is now Poundland and the building above. And you can see the building has been refenestrated in a very far from basic neo-Georgian. I mean, involving lintels and really quite a lot of detailing. It's not just a slab of neo-Georgian sash windows. And going around the side and looking from a distance, you see how much the Woolworth block is improved by being fenestrated. The idea is for the upper floors, I think in the original plan was to basically, they would be available for possibly workshop use, industrial use, or residential use, but basically to bring the building back into use, to actually make it, to inhabit it, which I think is thoroughly commendable. Already, this is a vast improvement on what's really there. The car park is improved. Again, I do slightly miss the concrete corduroy, which is the nickname for that sort of concrete. But it's certainly a great improvement on the particularly on the orange brickwork that had been slabbed underneath when Holford's moved in. And the back is particularly dramatic, and that while some of the zinc glazing survives above the cinema, though that has changed slightly in recent plans, but there's this rather dramatic glazed wall, which actually brings light into the back of the first floor of the Merrywalks Mall, coming right down to the ground here, though I don't think that's proposed anymore. The entrance to the cinema is brought forward, and there are these rather exciting wall climber lifts to really dramatize the street and also slightly hide the car park. And here's the corner of the Merrywalks multi-story car park. So a really, and that's that above there, that's the existing bowling alley. So a really quite dramatic transformation, which, you know, even if it isn't perfect, bearing in mind one's dealing with an ugly duckling, it may not have been converted completely to a swan, but it's not a bad effort. It's such an improvement on what has existed at any time. And the plan, this is the plan that actually went for planning permission and got approval. This shows that there needs to say loads and loads of plans, but this is the essential one that gives you an idea of what's going on. Where's my big arrow? This is the mall coming down from King Street. Here, where Bath Lane comes in, you can see Bath Lane is blocked off. Sorry, that shouldn't have happened. Bath Lane is blocked off, and shops are put in instead. That, therefore, I think is Santander, as was, and I believe as still is. This is, therefore, where the arcade was and isn't. This then is an artificially lit mall. I use the word mall when it actually has artificial lighting, and arcade when it actually has natural lighting, and a much more rational corner treatment instead of that great space in front of in front of Wilko's in the previous plan, and round to the new set of wall climber lifts at the back, dramatizing the facade. But the striking thing about this is the number of very large units that are made available to let. Now, whether this, which is slightly larger than the existing Wilkinson, was intended for Wilkinson or for somebody else, but you can see there are 3 units here converted out of what was Gateway and then Home Bargains here. And so 3 large units there, and there's this. And as Dransfield in various pronouncements has said that they believed in a food anchor, it did look as though they were trying to engineer something large enough to attract something like a Tesco Metro. And I think actually the unit at the top right-hand corner would be big enough. Whether Tesco Metro would want to come was, of course, or it doesn't have to be Tesco Metro, it could be Sainsbury's local, could be Morrison's if they do small ones anymore. I think they've given up on that. But the idea was to actually attract a food anchor. It looks like the idea was. Though, you know, the previous aspirational plan shows H&M in this corner. Anyway, work started to head on the car park and various other features. And alas, one of the first things that we lost was this. You see, I do harp on about it a bit, but it is rather lovely on a sunny day. But what I found difficult to understand about the proposals to remove daylighting from it is that in various other developments up and down the country, and I know the two in Birmingham particularly well, huge amount of effort and money has been spent trying to introduce natural light into spaces that previously were concrete caverns. And this is the Bull Ring, as built in the 1960s, the first modern American-style shopping centre. They were so proud of it. It had brilliant features, like actually the multi-storey car park was actually on top of the building, and you delivered your car to a car jockey who took it up in a lift. The lifts failed on the first day. That's an idea of just how bad it was. The bus station was directly accessed off the Inner Ring Road. The bus drivers coming in from blinding sunlight into darkness often used to collide with the bus inside. So it was every aspect of it. But the main thing is that the shopping was just deck after deck, as though you were actually in a department store. So basically there was no natural light. You know, everything, then the only light was from the shops, which is what retailers like. Retailers by and large don't like natural light. They want their shops to actually provide the light. And it was only when the Milton Keynes shopping building was built that that sort of hegemony was overthrown, and it was suddenly realized how much people like to shop in light. But this was deemed, it was built in the 1960s, it was deemed a failure by the mid-1970s, and they've been redeveloping it throughout the 80s and 90s. And they actually demolished, bit by bit, a multi-storey car park. You can see the rotunda that's there on the right. You can see there on the left. They demolished a multi-storey car park, just eating it away bit by bit in order to bring light right the way down into the depths of the building. So with all that effort and expense made, again, it is just difficult to understand why Dransfield would want to take an already existing well-lit arcade, even if you wanted to change the glazing system. And the other example from Birmingham is Birmingham New Street Station. This is, train buffs would probably recognize the locomotives here, and they're able to date the picture. I think that's from just after the West Coast Main Line was electrified, looking at that locomotive there. David Austin is looking avidly in the corner and starting to consult his I Spy Trains books. And here again, there's, as well as the platforms are a dungeon in a basement, and they still are. That's the one thing that hasn't changed. The concourse is again just another dungeon, and then above it is a layer of parking and a multi-story car park over here, and yet more shopping. And again, while alas, the platforms are still a dismal Stygian diesel dump. Literally, it's just full of diesel fumes and is as dark as ever. But the concourse, again, they even actually devised a special machine to actually eat the concrete away because they wanted to keep the station open while they were still actually excavating through the multi-storey car park. And the end result is this rather spectacular, well-lit space with this interestingly curvaceous roof. Now, yes, you say station concourse, but as you can see from, as with everything else these days, it's a station concourse stroke destination shopping experience. And in fact, it connects directly to the Bull Ring Centre. So you can see where the money is, just to cram in as much shopping as possible. And of course, they got a John Lewis into the bargain. But it is still a delightful space to go around before you go down the escalators onto the platform. This was achieved at great expense and at great effort. And it's just very difficult to imagine why you'd want to take away natural light from Merrywalks when, just to give two examples, and there are many more, when so many other places have spent so much money introducing natural light. So I made this, I put this in on behalf of the Civic Society in my objection to that aspect of the planning. I liked the arcade running down. This was the main point. I just thought it was crazy to when you already had a beautifully naturally lit arcade, it would seem crazy to get rid of it. But alas, while that was considered, it was decided on the balance that wasn't possible. I even actually campaigned as a secondary thing, saying, can't you just keep a bit of it where your little mall goes through? But alas, that is all gone, which is sad for other reasons, which will come. Yet another picture of that. Now, the oddest thing about the development, because everything was going ahead full speed, the plans were being refined at various stages, and there was a lot of activity. Of course, none of this has been helped by COVID and the various other things going on. But in November 2019, rather unexpectedly and very late in the day, Dransfield suddenly announced what they described as a borough market style indoor market. And in fact, there is a picture of Mark Dransfield and the centre's manager with big boards up saying, we want you. And they wanted baristas, they wanted craft beer shops, a whole variety of things. And this seemed an interesting development, and I couldn't work out at first where it was going to go. And this was an early render showing what the market was going to look like, the borough market style market. There's Bidbury cheese. So these are basically the market booths. However, adding insult to injury, you'll see this is under this rather dull sort of steel slatted roofing, which in fact is permanent shuttering for the concrete above. And guess what? As you can tell from the floor panel underneath, this is where the arcade was. So there you see a sunlit arcade replaced by a concrete roof with artificial lighting, which seems grueling now that the idea of a market has come to be. And the market, which I thought perhaps might be there. No, the market consists of taking out these 3 units, which it seems to me fairly obvious couldn't be let. There was nobody interested in tenanting these large units. So basically, Home Bargains, which was presumably going to be realigned with one of these, Home Bargains remains. The original arcade running to Home Bargains, but now without the glazing, remains. And this space approximately here has now suddenly become the Five Valleys Indoor Market. So it's a rather radical change from what is, a simple and rational plan, and does suggest that Dransfield was having difficulty or finding it perhaps just impossible to do this. Now, the market is in many ways such a good idea, and it's proved in many ways so successful. The sad thing is that it hadn't been started with. But one of my particular objections is that it has been described continuously, and this has been picked up by the press as either inspired by or modeled on or a borough market style market. Now, I actually lived near Borough Market for 9 years, and I know it very well. And all I can say is I don't have to see many pictures of Borough Market. That's the Shard in the background, adding to the drama of the place. There's a pub on the corner. There are interesting architectural features. There's lots of glazing, lots of natural light. It's tucked in underneath the railway viaducts going to from London Bridge across to Cannon Street. It's a lively place. It's an outdoor space. This was recently built when the new railway line went through to London Bridge Station. So they built a brand new facade here. Look at the amount of glass. Look at the amount of natural light. Once again, this is looking at Borough High Street to the left. I lived sort of just up Borough High Street onto the left-hand side. And this is an area full of pubs. It's not just a market. It's full of pubs. It's everything that the Five Valleys Indoor Market, for all the many good things about it, it isn't. It has that ambience, that place. Here's the produce. Again, you look up, you're under cast iron columns. You can see the glazed roof. It is a glazed market. And the sad thing is we had the opportunity to have a scaled down version of this. It wouldn't have been like Borough Market. And that didn't happen. And it's now, alas, too late. Instead of which we had this, which for all its many virtues, and I'm really pleased that they went for the market solution in the end. I think it's a pity that we're literally now standing underneath where the glazed arcade would have been. At one point, Dransfield Properties has spoken of the fact that perhaps to indicate its provenance with the Borough Market, has said that the stalls are built by the same people who have built the stalls for Borough Market. Well, judging by the roller shutters on them, they're made by the Birmingham Garage Industrial Doors Limited. Now, it's quite possible they make the roller shutters for Borough Market. I don't know. But again, some of the comparisons with Borough Market, I think, do not do a service to the Five Valleys Market, because it is a completely ludicrous comparison to anyone who's ever been to Borough Market. Anyway, the Five Valleys Indoor Market launched in spring 2020, and I think I'm right in saying that Marrow's Fruit and Vegetable were the first stall holder. And in fact, there's the opening ceremony with Kevin Cramston, the town mayor, on the left. Rather sadly, they're no longer there. There's the Warren, a little sort of coffee shop. This is a view from Thai to Go across to the other units, Gateway to India, Brody's Takeout, and Tamari Jai. And it was very exciting just how fast it began to fill up. And they'd seemed to, because I was very surprised to go into the Crown and Sceptre one evening, and bearing in mind Stroud is always inclined to say, oh, best thing to do is to tear it down, nothing can be done. And to hear people saying, I think it might really work, 6-day-a-week market. Yes, the farmers market is on a Saturday, the Shambles market, but there's nothing like a 6-day-a-week market like you might find in Gloucester or in Cardiff or Newport. But I know a lot of people in Stroud who go to Gloucester market every week precisely for the things that are not in the farmers market, the very opposite of a farmers market offer. And there are the record stalls and things like that. But anyway, it began to fill out with a surprising range of tenants. I rather like, because I think the gunmetal grey of this is rather heavy duty. And I rather like it, in fact, when some of the stallholders like Falafel Mama have actually sort of decorated their premises and given it a bit of personality. Pie Minister, a very revered pie maker from Bristol, moving in. Well, they weren't in Stroud before. Falafel Mama is in Stroud and will still be retaining its John Street shop. Tamari G. Now, this is when their stall first opened. As you can see, it looks a bit bleak and ramshackle. But by the time before they moved out, rather sadly, it had become funky and was like this. And they described themselves as a ramen bar and hangout. And I don't know, and it certainly was the liveliest place in the market. You can see selling acai beer at £4 a pint. I have no idea whether they actually had the licensing permission to do that, or whether the centre is licensed at all. But anyway, the whole place had a jolly sort of barriada feel about it. It felt, in fact, as though this hadn't been organised by Dransfield, but as though this had almost been a Stroudy takeover and the place had been squatted, apart from perhaps from the sort of industrial battleship quality of the actual units. But it remains a delightful and a surprising place, very shambolic compared to the almost the perfection of the rest of it. Now, this is Mark Dransfield on the left welcoming the artisan baker, who also has a stall at the farmers market. So a real range of tenants are coming in, and this, the most recent one, even their sign hasn't gone up here, is Armadilli, who've moved down from their premises in what was the Swan Inn on Swan Lane, and they've decided to give up that and move into the market. So they're not going to have two stores. So there are very, very encouraging signs. Now, this is the glazed market, the glazed arcade as was, and this is under Dransfield's. This was in 2016. This is the 2016 Christmas Fair, which everyone who saw it agreed was quite the best thing that had ever been seen, both the decorations, and showed again just the potential that wide arcade had. Now, these are only effectively small tables and stalls, but it produced a magnificent sort of, it was a big enough area for that. And if you think, therefore, what you could have done permanently by putting the markets on one side, you take one bay of where Roman is at the moment on that side, one bay on the other side, and then you would have room for, say, 1 or 2 units in the middle. You can see what a lively market hall. So you would come down from King Street, you would walk through the market hall and then into the rest of the development. Sadly, that didn't happen and was not to be, but it's a shame that if the market had been conceived first instead of as an afterthought, that is something that we could have had. Altered plans. As well as the introduction of an indoor market, Dransfield has made a number of other alterations and additions. To give an example, perhaps the most popular one was we had pressed as a civic society for the whole of the car park to become a green wall, using preferably ground-based planting, because it's rather expensive to install these irrigation systems. And while that didn't happen, at least that was taken on board, or appears to be, because we did get this design of which actually vastly improves that facade, because just where the facade has the disjunction where the levels change, there's now this green wall. I watch it carefully. Sometimes going for the bus, I see it on the auto watering going on. I just hope it survives, because I visited so many green walls that don't. But I think that was an excellent idea, and again shows a commendable flexibility. This is the original arcade running down from King Street, the narrow arcade, with this rather odd upper fenestration. This was Dransfield's first plan, and the latest plan seems a very slight change. Seems to be that now the clock is against a brick background, but the principle remains the same. I still think this is, while it has certain historicist tones that you might not like, I think it's such an improvement on what's there. And again, this is still a naturally lit part of the development. So this is I'm not precisely sure when these plans come about, but so a lot of work is still being done behind the scenes. This was the original scheme for the back entrance, and you can see actually with glass coming right down to the ground, which I think is no longer happening, with dominoes and what in fact became Fat Tony's on the right-hand side. And again, there's this artificial lighting raft above us. This has finalized some of the flooring details. I'm not convinced that the mirrors are a good idea as opposed to the white columns. But anyway, that's the detail that's been decided upon. This, when you come further in, go around on the indoor market, to give you an idea, is behind the glass here. That's what is now the indoor market. And this is, judging by the branding you see on both proposed for the outside now and on the inside, this is going to be a Costa Coffee, but at the moment it's basically kind of a spill out room for the market. And this is the suspended lighting raft, which is just a polite word for the modern word of form of fluorescent lighting. But at least light has been brought in through the Costa Coffee, if that's what it becomes on the left-hand side. This, which is the Poundland building on the left, it is while there might be a case for bringing the two doctor surgeries together. This is Stroud Valley Family Surgery and the Locking Hill Medical Centre, bring them into one building and putting a pharmacy there. Though we're not short of pharmacists now in the centre of town. It is a bit odd that this was what was Poundland, and it's a prime retail space right on King's Parade, the posh part of King Street. And this was proposed as being a good enough site for M&S Simply Food. It does just seem a waste of such a prime retail space to actually put a doctor's surgery there on that street level. So I don't quite understand that. So I'm not necessarily arguing against the doctor's surgery coming in, but whether it should be there rather than that being actually utilised for a more useful retail location. And I believe Poundland are moving out. Now, there had been a plan to actually not have an entrance into the back arcade, but with the new indoor market arrangement, as you can see, there is now an entrance left at the back. So whereas this previously would just have led to a Muse Court, but that is the Muse Court, which I think is very charming. So there you have the refenestrated side of the Woolworth Poundland building. There you have the back entrance to the Five Valleys Centre. This would be where the glazed arcade would be beyond. And then in front of it, they've slipped in this sort of Muse development, which both has a ground floor here and then faces back onto the car park on its first floor level. And I think that's a charming and ingenious development. And lots of the area around here, on both sides, residential accommodation has been inserted. And you just realize the amount of empty space that Streetlands was sitting on. And that's perhaps one of the more disgraceful aspects of their curatorship, if that's the word. That, incidentally, was what the back entrance, to remind you, looked like before. So that's what it's going to look like, and that's what it looked like before. So it's streets ahead of anything that Streetland could conceive. And just the amount of space brought back into use and imaginatively redeployed is impressive. We appear to have lost the wall climber lifts at the back, which I think means that the two main lifts are going to be reconditioned, but we've also gained another lift. And this is the lift as it comes out in the rooftop car park. And I think one of the ideas, the lift and staircase, is that actually it means you'll now go straight down and you will actually arrive on the main central spine mall that comes down from King's Parade. And of course, one of the convenient things, ironically, is that the reason it was so easy to construct is it goes through the space where the arcade was. They haven't had to drill through concrete. So basically, all this green mark here is where the glazed arcade used to be. And that then comes down into the market. You may have seen this now. There's the lift and the stairs going around it. But one of the things that intrigued me about this was the fact that beside it, there's this curious looking cupboard made of brick. And it turns out I was so intrigued by this because it seemed such an effort to blend in to say this is not a door. And it turns out this is another lift. This is the lift for the market traders. I don't quite see why it has to be disguised quite so heavily, but it's a rather entertaining idea to actually go to such an effort to actually disguise something as a wall, to say this is not a door, this is not a lift, this is a wall. And it also reminds me, as a sort of architectural reference, of the fact that one of the more famous examples of a brick doorway is this one on the podium of the Leicester Engineering Building, when James Stirling was told that for fire regulations there needed to be a door there. And as he was determined to have a solid mass of brick on the ground floor, they basically built a steel structure and filled it with engineering brick. And there you see two architects, in fact, who were revisiting the building, showing you the door. So basically it's designed to be invisible. So oddly, this now looks like an homage to the Leicester Engineering Building, which is one of the most famous buildings built in the post-war years. The doorway is somewhere there underneath the engineering labs. So that's, I think, an amusing jeu d'esprit at the end of it. So Finally, as you can see, I think I've harped on about the glazed arcade enough to not to repeat myself on that. I think it's a pity that a market first policy wasn't pursued. In fact, Mary Portas, I believe, at a meeting of the Stroud Book Festival, had actually expressed doubts about introducing this amount of new retail space in. And Mary Portas, in her reports and various other reports, always says, the importance of starting with markets. And there are very good examples in the country like Altrincham, where they very much completely revived their market. But fair play, though, we are getting a market, and it seems to be remarkably popular, both with users and with tenants who actually want to come in there. As to what the future of this development is coming out of COVID-19, assuming we are coming out of COVID-19, everyone seems very optimistic at the moment. We shall see. I don't know, but the fact remains that helped by the government telling everyone to stay at home and hide, an awful lot of shopping that was slowly moving online has moved very rapidly online. So one does wonder actually about whether we should not be contracting our town centre and increasing the residential, which commendably Dransfield is doing, rather than necessarily trying to add. But I do approve of the idea of a market, and I think Mary Portas would approve about it. I just think it's rather sad that if it had gone the other way around, we could have actually had a magnificent sunlit market hall. And I think that would have been a much pleasanter place than the commendable market, may not be Borough Market, but the commendable Five Valleys Market that has replaced what would otherwise, let's face it, have been just a few national chains. So I'm basically very enthusiastic about what Dransfield have done for Stroud. I'm very enthusiastic about what they've done for the to the Merrywalks market, with the reservations I've already expressed. But I think of all the developers that we could have got, I can't think of a developer who could have actually done a better job than Dransfield's done. And admittedly, as I said to Mark earlier, coming after Streetland is very hard. You're bound to shine, but I still think they've done in many ways. So the quality of some of the finishes has been a lot higher than they would necessarily have to have done. The detailing, particularly the shop windows. If you see the steelwork on the shop windows, I regret that we get to lose the wall climber lifts, because I thought they would have been dramatic and fun. But even now already, even going down the existing mall, the main central mall, you look at the quality of the floor finishing, of the detailing, of the glazing, it is streets ahead of what Streetland would have achieved and what Streetlands would have even been bothered to achieve. And just to see the upper floors brought back into use and the refenestration of the Woolworths lump is going to be, when that's completed, is a commendable improvement to the town. So I salute Dransfield with the reservations I've already expressed, but I think I've repeated them now over and over so many times again that I won't say it again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim. That was incredibly detailed and thorough investigation and analysis of this complex of buildings. It must have taken a great deal of time sourcing all those illustrations. Clearly, it's a really awkward site, both in plan with all the buildings around it and the fragmentation, and in section, obviously the different levels and everything else. We are now giving Mark Dransfield a chance to tell us anything that he might want to tell us before we do the questions. Mark. Mark, are you there?
Yes,
you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to turn your video on?
I think because I'm below 10%, it's not allowing me to do this.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well,
but, could I just say thank you very much indeed for inviting me this evening, and thank you very much for the appraisal on. I've learned quite a lot actually, so thank you. Just a few gaps in the woodwork there. The grant was £3 million, which we got from GLEP, and it's a £1 million loan.
Sorry, I got that the wrong way around.
Yes, it was the wrong way around, but it's fine. Now, the idea for Borough Market came from, we take all of our centre management teams around various exemplar schemes in the UK, and Borough Market was one we took our teams around 3 years ago. So we got to know the directors there pretty well, because we wanted to have a design guide for how markets should be set out, particular market stalls, because we operate with local authorities quite a number of markets around the UK. And when I went down to the Borough Market last Christmas, I suddenly realised an area that we wanted to do. I thought if we could produce local people operating out of these stalls and supplying local people with local produce primarily, it should be on for a winner with the people of Stroud. And so with that in mind, I spoke to the director there, and we got one of their leases, and I understood then how prescriptive they were with the different market stalls. So they are very, very tightly worded, so people cannot stray into other areas and be competing with each other. It develops quite an unusual mix of retailers which cover a huge range of the food industry. And one of the first people we met down there after pinching their lease, and you are quite correct, the units are made in Birmingham, and they're made in Birmingham. Those are the same units that are made for Borough Markets, but the Borough Market ones are British Racing Green, and ours are, we decided to make ours grey. One of the first people we'd spoken to was the Prime Minister, and I went to see them in Borough Markets, and so we managed to successfully get them to come and invest here. And they also, we also met with Just 60, who will be launching their home delivery service from the centre next week in electric vehicles. So you can order from the Just 60 platform from any one of the producers in the market hall here, and they would deliver to your home address. We did set out with aspirational brands, and I believe that the demographics and the catchment of the area do command a higher demographic of retail than currently existed when we bought the centre. So what we're doing, we're going to be delivering our own small department store called Sanderson's into Stroud, and that will house people like Chanel, Initio, House of Wood, Clarins, Voya, L'Occitane, Michael Kors, Valentino Guess for you ladies, and we then have mixed brands, which is Tommy Hilfiger, Max Mara, Barber, Hobbs, Whistles, Oak, Holland Cooper, which are a local business. Bella's Gone Home, which is another friend of mine from Notting Hill, who is coming here with upcycled furniture. And when I first started looking at Stroud, when I googled Stroud, it said it was Notting Hill with wellies. And so you'll see the Palladium architecture for what I call the brick tomb, which is the Woolworths building, is based on Notting Hill architecture. All the detail in there has been lifted immediately from some of those buildings and installed, or will be installed, into your building here. I'm looking to start work on there mid next year. The tenders are out, and sorry, we've received the tenders back. We're within budget, so we're just now looking to agree a deal with Poundland, whose lease has ended, to get rid of them, and then we're going to start work straight away. So there's going to be some amazing brands coming in with Sanderson's, and that will be open for Easter. And I'm hoping that by a year in Easter, we will have the new medical centres open. And on the top floor of there's going to be some primary care facilities delivered as well. So it will be a complete health facility. We've worked in Stocksbridge in North Sheffield, which is where we're from. And we've been working with a gentleman who has pioneered the art of working closely with people who've got problems, and it's called social prescribing. So they actually get to the root of the problem, and it's not all about popping pills, it's about giving other forms of help there, whether by financial advice, it may be seeing a psychiatrist, it might be going to the gym to lose weight, all sorts of different features. So we're going to be working very closely with the GP surgeries on social prescribing. And the chap that actually started this is a gentleman called Lord Andrew Mawson, who is a personal friend of mine, and his facility in a very poor part of London has been a beacon amongst an awful lot of politicians, and it's something that's been hugely successful down there. So we're very much looking forward to working with your community on this. The big problem we've had with this scheme has been it's one of the worst shopping centres I think I've ever come across. And it's taken 3 years to start to understand every aspect of this scheme. But one of the key areas is to create linkage. And the linkage has got to be created between the bus station and the King Street here. And you're topographically challenged in the area, so it's how we deal with that. We're not putting those climber lifts in, but we have ordered a new lift which is being produced in Germany at the moment and will be installed by Easter this year, which travels at 1.5 meters per second, which will link the bus station with the bowling alley at the top. Now the bowling alley, we're working closely with them. We've had our business consultants in, and we're looking to make that a prime visitor attraction in the area over this next 12 months. And we're working closely with the owner there as well. You've probably also seen we've created some steps down to the cinema, and we've altered this pricing structure on the car park such that it makes it attractive for people to come into the town during out of hours, and we'll hopefully create a strong linkage then so people feel safe travelling from the car park to the cinema. And then next door to that, we've been working closely with Fat Tony's, and we're going to be opening a new restaurant there during the course of next year with Fat Tony's, and that'll be hugely exciting and be right next to the cinema. I've never come across a cinema without a restaurant next door to it until I arrived here in Stroud. But the community have been very warm to receive us. We're very open to ideas. We're open to criticism, and we will try and respond to that in a positive way. Nobody's perfect. I love my architecture, and I know you guys do with joining the Civic Society, and I fully respect the views of you all. So if you have any questions, I'm here and be more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Right, well, thank you very much for that detailed summary of optimism, I think I should say. I'll stop the sharing at that point. Please turn on your videos, but leave your mics muted. There have been quite a lot of questions on chat. So what I've done is group them into categories. So I'll read out several questions, and then either Tim or Mark can respond, please. So let's start on the glazed roof. So there's 3 questions here. In this age of sustainability, what was the rationale behind scrapping the glass roof and replacing it with an electrically lit cavern, which is reminiscent of the horrible shopping centre which used to be at the bottom end of the town in Bath, which has subsequently been demolished and replaced by open streets? Were the glazed lights removed to increase the parking above? And it's a pity that the glazed arcade roof wasn't just picked up and rotated 90 degrees over the new route. Do either of you have any comments on that?
Yes, I'll start with that if I may. We've replaced all the lighting in our centre now, with the exception of the Edwardian gallery, which we're working on at the moment. And we've replaced that with LED lighting. The energy running costs of this building have been reduced significantly. We're going to be covering, I think it's 5,500 square foot of the roof over the bowl with PV to use solar power to generate electricity for our MAL. And on the new doctor surgery, that roof, which is 10,000 square foot, will be again covered in PV, so that the doctor surgery will be, the running costs will be very, very low indeed. So we have looked at those issues. We took the decision that, and it was my decision, that atrium was ghastly. However you look at it, it's a personal opinion, is architecture, but I hated it. And we wanted to bring a lift, which was from the main car parking area that went straight down into the central core of the shopping area, and not to one end, which would cause massive problems for retailers in the middle. So it was a connectivity thing as far as I was concerned, and also an ugliness. And what you see at the moment is when you come in through from the where the GP surgery is going to be, there is a GP entrance on that level, and there we will be delivering that ladder lighting system right round to the front of the market area. and that will be taking place during the course of next year.
Good. The next question I have is actually 4 questions, all about retail. So one is, do you really think that Stroud needs 3 markets? I think that's been sort of answered by Tim. That came in by email, that question. Next one, now that the mainstream retailers will not be coming to Stroud, our catchment of potential shoppers will continue to go to Bristol, Gloucester, Cheltenham and Bath. I would surmise that the only people shopping in Stroud for everything arrive on the bus and are not big spenders. Comments.
Right. Let me deal with one.
Sorry,
we'll be having concierge car parking for when that arrives.
Okay.
And the quality of the retailers that we'll be putting in here are significant. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're going to be spending £1 million on the shop fit, and it will be phenomenal. Our stores, we've just opened a store up in Morpeth, which is our second Sanderson store, and our first Sanderson store is doing very well. We've got a strong online presence as well. So we're very confident in our ability to secure tenants here.
Yes, I think part of the problem is, of course, it's only half done at the moment, so people don't appreciate that. There were 2 other parts to that question. What impact will the amount of new retail space have on the traditional shops in Stroud? And a similar one, how far is the Five Valley Centre taking trade from the shops in the town centre proper? Also, will those on lower incomes be losing out as a result of gentrification? And I think here we're looking perhaps to Downstretcher and that sort of shop, which doesn't command the sort of rental or capital investment that other Sanderson type shops have.
Well, in terms of rental, they're paying more than Sanderson's will be paying, we have too many poor grade quality shops in the centre when we bought it. They're all, a lot of them selling cheap throwaway garments, i.e. your Roman originals and everybody else. Argos were pulling out anyway. They served the break notice, and select poor quality throwaway retailing. The quality of the retailers here in this centre did not serve its catchment. And indeed, Stroud as a whole, as a town centre, does not speak to all of its catchments. And this is why the trade has been poor in the town centre. But I think with what we're doing here, it will benefit all the retailers in the town, not only in our centre, but for the rest of the town as well. And we're not here to take trade from the town. We're here to work with the town. I mean, we've been speaking to Robert Jenrick with your MP about getting a town's fund here, so we can then look at all the paving, sort your paving out, sort your lighting out, which is shocking, CCTV in the high street areas, which needs to be incorporated. And just your general public realm is poor, and it needs to be upgraded. And hopefully with a big investment like this, it will attract other people to come in, and also government interest to hopefully help us get over the line with some of these issues.
Okay. Last one on the chat is, Tim, you mentioned that some of the market's tenants have already moved out. Could you or Mark please explain why? Not enough footfall?
No, the fruit and veg guy who came in to open the scheme was not properly funded, and the quality of what he was putting forward was very, very poor indeed. So that was at our behest. The next one was the Tamara G, who was drinking, driving, being abusive to my staff, and we told him to clear off.
Okay.
And we will be replacing him with a better quality covenant, who's a lovely lady and does the same product.
Okay. It appears that some of you can't start your videos. Is that correct?
Can you hear me? I'm still here, but I haven't started my video.
Well, I wasn't referring to you. I was referring to everyone else. I'm just manually asking people to start.
David, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
I tried to start my video, but it said, okay, it allows me now. It said, first time I tried it, said the host had disabled me.
Yes, sorry, I turned several people
There
off.
we are.
They were rather distracting. So
That's better. That's better.
I'm turning everyone on as far as I can. Right, so does anyone else have any questions they would like to raise? If you wave your hand or whatever, or shout if you're not on video.
Well, David, if I could just make a comment rather than a question to Mr. Dransfield. It's just to say that I agree with his view that investment and retail in the town will encourage more of the same. And personally, I would see Merrywalks / Five Valleys moving forward as good for the whole of Stroud.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can you hear me?
I've got Alan Ford there.
Yes. Wonderful presentations, very exciting and whatnot. Nostalgia too for us that were involved in the earlier days. And I've got so many questions that they're actually confusing me. But a question that came up from Mark's presentation about the creation of linkages and whatnot, and all these exciting add-ons that seem to be on the horizon if they're allowed to continue. And I think there are good grounds for allowing them to continue. But in the past, we've had all these wonderful things that have been promised, and then it's not been promised and left us sometimes with quite a bit of scar tissue. So I'm just wondering how we can be assured that this will work.
Well, we're a family business. I started the business 28 years ago, and it's my money. And I am committed and wedded to the scheme that we've agreed to do. We've accomplished an awful lot of regeneration where people have said it's impossible in other areas of the country. And a very good friend of mine, who is the property director of Home Bargain, said to me, "Mark, you've now lost the plot if you're buying that Merrywalks Centre." And he said, "You will never turn that round." Now, I'm a Yorkshireman and I like a challenge. And I was determined that I was going to turn this round. Now, even today, we've decided that we're going to look at the 3 two-bedroom flats which have been walled off and inaccessible above the Curios Lounge. And they're beautiful. They've got the 1920s fireplaces in. They've even got their baths in. It will not cost much to restore those. So we're going to get hold of Curios and we're going to try and reopen that Burton door at the front, so you can walk up the stairs onto the roof, and we'll create a garden area at the roof and reopen those 3 flats there. I found another flat underneath the MP's office, and we're making a little garden flat with that. And we've put new glass bricks in at the front, so underneath the pavement, and there'll be a little indoor garden area there. So we've got plenty to go, and each time I come down here, I'm finding more things. So we've got a huge basement here, which was just burning electricity when I first bought it. So we've ripped all the lights out of there, and we've put a door on there, and we have replaced those with LEDs. So it's a bit like James Bond when you go boom, boom. As you go into a different zone, the lights come off. But the electricity costs, we've reduced down on here enormously. And I think I now nearly understand every corner of these buildings. And it's been a journey. But each of those corners will yield a small business or a part of a business, and we will keep going until we've completed this journey. And you have my word on that. And I love my job. It's a hobby as well as being a business, and I'm very passionate about it. And if I tell you I'm going to deliver something, it will be delivered.
Thank you.
So,
We have a hand up from Nicholas.
Thank you. Walking around the Merrywalks, now Five Valleys Centre today, it was a truly exciting experience and could be a model for revamping malls all over the country in places where there is spending power in the surrounding area. But I'd like to raise two questions, probably to Mark. The first thing is, what is it that stops local authorities tackling the problems of linkages into town? Because the whole of his concept depends on tapping the spending power of the wider area, and yet it's almost impossible to cross the roads without taking your life in your hands. And secondly, how does one get many more people living close to the town centre? Is the answer for people who are currently developing shopping centres to get into the housing business as well, in partnership with local authorities, and to compulsorily purchase all undervalued property, all underused property around the town centre that's sat empty far too long?
Yeah. Can I do that in reverse order, if I may? First of all, on the how to get people into the town centre, we've done a joint venture with West Lindsey District Council in a place called Gainsborough, we bought some listed buildings which were in complete decay, and we converted them to shop on the ground floor and flats above. And we pioneered that 2 years ago, and each flat let very quickly, within weeks, not months, weeks. But what we were doing, we were delivering flats which were probably 600-700 square foot, maybe 1 or 2 bedrooms, and those flats that you can rent now, which are new build, for a single bedroom flat, 450 square foot. I mean, you can literally touch the walls. They're dreadful. Nobody wants to live in those rabbit hutches. But what I found then was a little recipe. So we then did, in North Yorkshire, in Selby, we've done this with our shopping centre. We were in Market Cross Centre. As people were coming out, retailers, or going bust, or we were doing deals for them to come out, we were renting just the ground floor and recapturing the upper floor and putting flats there. And people like living in town centres because they can walk out, they can go to get a coffee, they can go to the medical centre. Everything's so much easier. And what it becomes then is self-policing. So people enjoy living there, but because people are living there, they're also being vigilant of their own town centre. So it's enormously successful. And I think we've done 7 flats here. Every single one has gone within the first week. And this garden one that I was just talking about, that goes on the market next week. And I'll be amazed if it doesn't go straight away. So I think the recipe there is for landowners to realise that they can actually create value by opening up those upper floors. I went with my mother round Beverley 2 weeks ago, and I said to my mum, I said, have you seen all these properties here? If you look at the 2nd and 3rd floors, they're empty. Absolutely empty. And every market town you go around, it's the same. But people would like to live here, I think, if they're done tastefully. So that's my answer to that second question. With regards to the first question, I think the problem is we've all suffered bad planning for probably the last 20 years. And over this last 5 years, we've become a lot more sophisticated. I get my iPhone out now and look at where south facing is when we're looking at shops, because everybody wants to be shopping on the sunny side of the street, not the north side, which all the shops end up closing. So we've got a problem here with the cinema because it's north facing. And when we're dealing with flat turners, they say, well, shall we put some tables and chairs outside? So forget it. No. Forget it, because you're on the north face there. We need to be a bit more creative. So I can't give you a direct. I would like to think that people will find their ways to centres if there's a diversity of offer there. And I think that's shown with your market. Because when I first came down here, firstly, I didn't know where Stroud was. When Rothschilds rang me up and said, Mark, we have a look at 2 assets. One's in Droylsden, Manchester, where I knew where that was because we've got a shopping centre we own in Openshaw. And the other one's in Stroud. So I said, where's Stroud? It's somewhere near Bristol, I think. I said, have you not been?
But the point I was making was the important thing is not just to make the centre attractive, but to make it easy to walk into the centre.
Absolutely.
And some money has to be spent on making those road crossings, for example, so you can get to the cinema
Yes.
from the park without taking your life in your hands.
Yes, and we've tried to do that so far, and we've not finished yet, but I think we've made a good start. We've the lift that we've ordered will make a huge difference to people who are coming on the bus to get up to that retail concourse or get up to the bowling alley. They'll be up there in no time. The lifts that we've got at the moment were just not fit for purpose. You should never have been installed in the first place. And we're spending a fortune just keeping them going as long as we can do, just to keep the centre functioning.
Right, thank you, Mark. You certainly get your money's worth from Mark when it comes to answers. Niall has a question.
Yes, it's an observation. I lived in Bermondsey in central London for almost 30 years. And
Yes.
A chap by the name of Larry Hansen, who worked for, who organised Groundwork Southwark, observed about Bermondsey Street in 1991 that the state of the public realm sets your expectation of a place.
Yes.
And if the public realm is broken down and poorly lit, then you have a very poor expectation of that area. So there is a responsibility for the local authorities, who are the only people who can coordinate the public realm, to actually work for the greater good of the community that is around that public realm. So that was the first point. Second point is business rates. We live in very strange times, and retail, bricks and mortar retail, have a tough time. Is there any lobbying going on to reduce the government's dependence or addiction to business rates? So there you go.
Yes, two things there. Okay, public realm, completely agree with you. Just about every one of my schemes has got fountains in or some form of water feature. We participate in Britain in Blue every single year, and every single one of our centres either gets a gold or a silver, because it makes people feel happy and when they're walking around. My philosophy on architecture and development is that you should not be able to point to one thing that makes it successful. It's got to be a blend of everything and switches all of your senses on when you go in there. And when I first came here and spoke to the manager's wife at Santander, she said, "Mark, that car park's disastrous." I said, I just fear for my life when I go in there. So that's why we did the car park first of all. And you notice we put speakers around the car park, so you have tweeting birds in the car park when you go in there. If you're going to stick there, it's to try and make you feel a little bit happier. Burst around sound in all of our centres, and you'll sit down the gallery, you'll notice when you're walking down there, there's some music on it, and if it's quiet, it just makes you feel a bit more comfortable walking to that environment. But I agree, your public realm here is appalling. And when I came in here, we've done a scheme which we shared with your town council, because we put a bid in for a towns fund, and we shared with your MP and GLEP as well, to look at the bus shelters down there, because you're right, you have not got on-time buses, so you need to know when the buses are coming. We've done a scheme with nice green roofs on, shared ownership there, a bit like outside the Natural History Museum, where you come into an environment where it slows traffic down automatically. But it needs sorting out, and I think there is definitely a will. There is a will there. What we've got to do is tap into some central government funds to be able to fulfil that dream, and I think we will get there with that. With regard to business rates, I told you I've got a store. I'm very passionate about this subject matter. I think there should be a point of sale tax. I think Amazon are the biggest polluters on the planet. They're driving about on the highways, maintainable at the public expense. They pay £300 million in tax, and quite frankly, it's shocking. It's shocking that this government should allow this to happen. There is a rates review, as you know, in 23, which we backdated as 21 tabled then. But my view is there should be a point of sale tax. So your sweatshirt that you're wearing, if you buy that from my store, you pay the same tax in my store as you do online, and abolish business rates and just add more value onto a VAT situation, is my view. And then all this cheap jack lot with their Pretty Little Thing and all the throwaway garbage, and they're just gobbling up the planet. Yeah. They'll all go bust, and they'll go back to America when that happens, because all of a sudden these massive sheds in green fields, which they're paying £7.50 a square foot on, and my retailer will be paying 25 quid a square foot, there's a massive imbalance and it needs correcting. Yeah. So I'm very passionate about that. And yes, I do lobby.
Yeah.
Can I suggest we bring our Q&A to a close at that point? It's been fascinating, really. Now, you probably weren't expecting this, but we're going to have now a short commercial break. So here's your opportunity. Tomorrow night, there is a late night opening in the indoor market, which is open till 9 p.m. and you're being promised the very best of Gloucestershire's street food vendors, a little background music and a great atmosphere. So why not go along and have a look?
And I will be there if everyone wants to come and have a chat. How's that?
Can't be there.
So, thank you, everyone. Now, if you would like to turn your microphones on and give a final round of applause to Tim Mars for his enlightening talk this evening, and to Mark Dransfield for coming along to be grilled, to be honest. And I'll then have a few announcements on future events. Thank you. So our next talk